In today. I am so excited about my guest today. His name is Alex Holmes, and he's from the UK. And I'm particularly excited about the show today because I'm wanting him to enlighten me a little bit as well as my audience on mental health issues and things, particularly dealing with men in our communities, the African American communities. And the reason for that is because I'm sure most people are aware that there've been a lot of, I know myself, I've a lot of people I've been hearing have been passing away suicide, and I've been noticing a lot of different things that have been going on. And in particularly, one of the most recent celebrity people was Stephen Boss Twitch from he was the DJ on the Ellen DeGeneres show. And when I looked at a lot of his videos, and I'm sure like most people, I personally could not put a handle on it because I was like, he seemed to be happy from what we can see. He had a family. He had, from what it appeared, success. He was in a great network of people, and I often wonder, like, why? Why would someone of this nature commit suicide? I just didn't understand it, so I wanted to do this show, and I'm so happy that Alex took me up on my offer for him to be a guest. Thank you for coming on the show, Alex, today.
No, it's a pleasure to be here, Carolyn. I'm so excited to get into this conversation with you. And I know it's weird to say I'm excited to get into a conversation of this kind of nature, but it really does drive me to do the work with the work I'm doing. And it really does help me bring to light a lot of the stuff that's going on with this. So, yeah, I'm
Well,
looking forward to having this convo with you.
well, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to us getting into it. So give me 1 second. I want to check one thing really quick, and we will be ready to get into it. Give me 1 second. Okay. Okay, Alex, tell me a little bit about yourself. I don't necessarily want to initially go into your story right away. I
Mhm.
want to find out a little bit about you as a person and your career path that you're in. I noticed when I looked up some of your accolades and things, you're an author, you're a hypnotherapist.
Mm.
I remember being, one time, just digressing a little bit, I had someone bring me on stage one time and hypnotize me. I don't know if it really worked, but I want to know
Oh,
a little.
wow.
I want to know a little bit about it.
Okay.
You are a heart set coach, and
Yep.
you're a men's mental health speaker, and you also have a podcast, right?
Yep. Yep.
All
Yep.
right. And in your show, you talk about a lot of diverse thing about trying to wake men up. So
Yep.
I think you have the experience I need to kind of enlighten me. So let's get into your story a little bit.
Yeah, thanks for that. Before I became a coach and a therapist, I was a journalist. I was a journalist for 5 years, and I worked at the Daily Mail. I worked in these big newspaper organizations. I was really really going in there to change the world. I really wanted to
Hmm.
just be that guy. And when I got in there, I in the UK we have diversity schemes, and I don't know whether it's the same. It's like these equal opportunities experiences for people of minority backgrounds
Okay.
or of from the working class backgrounds typically. So you go into these organizations which are predominantly white, which are predominantly middle to upper class, and you go in and you're there to kind of be a different quota in these places. But
Hmm.
what I found
Hmm.
was, I mean, it was really hard work. It was really challenging work. It was an experience that I look back on fondly, but also with great sympathy to myself, because it was difficult trying to navigate that world, being a black man in this space, and being going through all the typical things that you would expect in a predominantly white institution, with regards to not being believed, not being trusted,
Hmm.
the microaggressions, which are small aggressions that are thrown at you
Right.
on the grounds of your race. Um, and having this psychological harm thrown at me and experiencing that quite a bit was a huge challenge for me. So in my time working at the Daily Mail, just in journalism in general, actually, because I moved from paper to paper,
Okay.
I experienced a lot of that kind of those challenges from the organizations, and it led me to have my first breakdown at
Mm.
work. And
Okay.
in my time working as a journalist, I had three breakdowns, and I received no sympathy. and I received like lack of support, and I'm building up all around that. I didn't know how to connect with myself, with what was going on with me,
Mhm.
but also what was going on with work. But in further investigation into myself, it wasn't necessarily just work that was causing that. It was a societal and an environmental thing. I had just come back from traveling abroad where I was teaching English. I was back in my parents' home.
Mhm.
I was searching for friendship. I never had any friends from, because I left my home city in
Okay.
London, and I was away for 5 years, and all my friends had moved and gone on and done all their different, doing what they were doing.
Mhm.
And I'd come back and I had no connections in the city that I was born in, and I couldn't, and the cost of living, so can't really move out, all these different things.
Right.
So I was lonely. And that kind of contributed to a lot of the feelings I had. Um, and then my friend told me, I made a few friends, and one of them did say to me that I should look into getting therapy. Ended up going to therapy, and I started having these huge revelations around what kind of friendships I want, what kind of relationships I want, what kind of person I am, what things bring me joy, what things give me love, what am I looking for, what am I getting, what are my aims and what are my goals, who do I want to
Mhm.
be. And I started having these conversations with myself, started looking into who I was, started doing the spiritual work, started doing the psychological work. Then I eventually left my job in journalism, and I went out and I started training as a coach, as a health
Mhm.
coach at first, because I was really interested in the nervous system and what that does when we are interacting with other people.
Mhm.
I found that a lot of Black men was really struggling in the UK, particular with prostate cancer, with other forms of illness that they just weren't getting themselves checked out for, like bowel cancer and diabetes and all these things,
Mhm. Mhm.
male pattern baldness. But a lot of men were struggling with stress, anxiety, and they were letting it metabolize within them, and it was causing them a lot of pain in later life. Because
Mm.
I had experienced that. My body kind of began to work against me in
Right.
numerous ways.
Mhm.
um, and then I just thought, you know what, I love the coaching stuff, but I really want to go further. And then I
Mhm.
began training as a psychotherapist. So I'm in the process of finishing off my qualification. But as part of that qualification, I did hypnotherapy and then counseling. So
Okay.
I'm a hypnotherapist, but I've got the counseling experience there with me until I fully graduate as a hypno-psychotherapist. Um,
Okay.
so yeah, and I wrote the book and I got the podcast and all of that came together. So I was trying to
Right.
condense all of it into, so I'm not taking up too much time,
That's
but
okay.
I was
No,
trying to
I
condense it
want
all. Yeah,
I want us to just dump it all in. It's okay
yeah.
with how much time we take. Now, from what I'm listening to, so did you when you had the breakdown, because the initial breakdown,
Mhm.
because I understand you had multiple because of the stressors and things that you were dealing with.
Yeah.
Did you realize you were having a breakdown? I know your friends told you you needed therapy, but did you realize as an individual that you were
Mm.
having a breakdown? Did you just continue throughout your door?
I think it was, the first one was a panic attack, and
Okay.
I was sitting in, I remember very, very clearly, I was sitting at my desk, because I went to university and studied French and Spanish. I could speak French, and I remember
Mm,
and I had this huge imposter syndrome, this huge inferiority complex at work, and I didn't think that I could go and cover a story in French or
mhm.
do any amount of good job in that area. And because of my confidence was knocked so much by a lot of my colleagues up until that point.
Right.
And I my head of news was storming around trying to find somebody to
Mhm.
go to in England at the time. There was a huge conflict on the border with regards to migrants coming over from Europe into the UK, and we're
Okay.
still having this really huge conversation around migrants and illegal
Yeah.
immigration here. So
Right. I
so we're
understand
having,
that.
right, so yes, we're having these big conversations yeah. So at the time, but the border was with the French border, because
Mhm.
England kind of tips onto France at the very bottom of it. And
Okay.
so I was like, "Oh, they're going to ask me, they're going to ask me," and I began to really work myself up internally. And I started to freeze. I could feel my goose pimples coming up all over my arms. I dissociated with myself. I was not in the room. My mind and my body were so disconnected. I felt scared. I didn't know where I was or anything. I was just rooted
Really?
in place. So mentally, I
Hmm.
was just not here. I started
Mhm.
to lose my breath. I couldn't breathe properly. I was scared. I was frightened. Um, and that's how and I knew something was going on. I didn't know the language. I didn't know that it was a panic attack. I didn't know that I was having
Right.
a sort of breakdown at the time. But yeah, it was a very it was an awful experience, and and I don't know if anybody has, like, if you've watched Harry Potter or you've listened to it as a book or read it or watched the film. But there's these dementors, there's these black hooded figures that come in
Mhm.
on the third film or the third book, and they kind of pull away at all of the happiness and the joy in you.
Mhm.
And it's a metaphor for depression. And I
Mm.
remember I was kind of really sitting in that space for a long time. And the more I was deeper in that space of that depressed space, I became more susceptible to anxiety and panic attacks and feelings of disconnection and loneliness. And I think that that was one of the triggers there for me.
So when you after that happened initially,
Mhm.
and I'm sure you just kind of knew something, like you stated, you knew something was going on. You didn't necessarily know the clinical term for what was going on. Once you became more familiar with what, okay, I'm experiencing a real issue here, and you begin to get therapy, did you kind of take a look into yourself a little deeper and notice and thought, okay, I may have experienced this earlier in life as well?
Yeah. Um, I don't think
Maybe.
I don't think I'd ever experienced a panic attack before then.
Okay.
I think I grew up with a pretty, like, I did have anxiety. I
Right,
was
that's
quite
what I meant.
I was
Yeah.
yeah, I did have anxiety. I was in, like, really anxious spaces quite a lot.
Mhm.
I had to kind of deal with those things and kind of push on through and just ignore. Most of my childhood and young adulthood was about ignoring those
Right.
things and pushing through it. Um, but when you start to add the other responsibilities that come with adulthood and the other
Mm.
sorts of realities of being a black man in a Western society, and trying to navigate that and trying to identify yourself in all of these spaces, and then you just can't, what I mean. I mean, just to be real, you can't take the disrespect anymore. Like, you're just like,
Right.
you're constantly being tested, you're constantly
Right.
being pushed, and all these different things. So as an adult, there were more pressures. There was money pressures, there were
Mhm.
career pressures, they were feeding into your ability, like, sorting out what was happening with you.
Mhm.
And that affects your coping mechanisms. And that was affecting, I was drinking more. I was trying to block out a lot of my problems with substances, where it was like
Right.
more like, for me, it was alcohol.
Mhm.
Trying to avoid things by, like, being in the gym often and just not trying to work,
Disconnecting. Right.
disconnecting completely.
Mhm.
If I felt angry, I would push it away. If I felt
Right.
scared, I'd push it. I push everything away because nothing
Mhm.
was supposed to phase me. I was supposed to be
Right.
strong, supposed to be resilient, supposed to be a black man. And a black man is somebody who doesn't necessarily complain about anything. He just gets on, he takes all the punches, and he succeeds in the end. And there were men in my workplace who were like that,
Mhm.
and who categorically told me things that, like, I need to man up, or I need to grow some
Right.
balls, or I need to do all
Right,
these different
right.
things. And that did nothing for my confidence again.
Mhm.
So it was just a
'Cause you
lot of
second guess yourself,
so now, because I thought that, and these were black men that were telling me these things. So I
not
was very much,
surprised.
so I was just like, this is not what I signed up for. I want to be
Right.
supported by other men. I want to be supported by other black men,
Mhm.
specifically. But in that period of time, they were very much indoctrinated. I want to use the word indoctrinated into that society. They had
Mhm.
molded an area for themselves where they fit into the categories that these institutions could support for them. And then
Mhm.
so when I reflected back on it, when I was writing my book, when I was sorting out the podcast, when I was doing all of these things, I started looking at it. Started thinking to myself, so why do we as men feel that we have to be or act a certain way? Why do we as black men feel that we can't communicate with one another, have compassion for one another in this way? In the UK, anyway, that's how it kind of
It's a
manifested.
it's ev I think that's everywhere. I don't think it's
Yeah.
just the UK. And just to pause real quick, when I
Mhm.
thought about when I was sitting here listening to some of the things you were stating, I kinda digressed mentally, and I was thinking, I wonder if that's some of what's going on here in the US. We are having a big thing with the police officers and how they're interacting with Black men and how Black men are responding, when they just simply get pulled over by a police officer. And it may be some of the same thing, just the, like you said, the fear, of course, not knowing what's going to happen, the uncertainty of whether I'm going to make it home. So I think it's a deeper correlation to a lot of different elements.
Yeah.
Because if, when they flee, if you're on the outside looking in, I'm like, okay, just stop. And do what the officer says. And sometimes they do that and things still don't go the way they're supposed to.
Mm,
So now they're often wondering, how do I respond to this? And it
mm.
doesn't have to necessarily be a white officer. It can be a Black officer, as
As we've
recent as
seen,
this, yeah, as we've
yeah,
seen lately. So
yeah.
it's really, yeah, I guess it kind
It's
of transcends a lot of
y-
things.
yeah. I mean, a lot of my work is focused on traumas that are specifically experienced by men
Hmm.
and specifically experienced through masculine cultures and
Hmm.
understanding what that looks like and what that does to men.
Right.
So things like this, because I even and forgive me, I've completely forgotten what the victim's name was, who was killed in Tennessee by those 5 police officers. But
Oh, George Floyd.
no, no, no,
No, no,
in Tennessee recently.
Tennessee. Oh, Trey. Wait a minute. Gosh, I'll get his name. I know his name. I think his name is Trey something. But you can go ahead and continue talking.
Yeah, he basically, I said on my podcast, this episode actually. There's a new episode coming on Friday, but in one of the episodes, I basically was saying that if he had survived that beating up by those police officers, black or
Mhm.
white, and it's the post traumatic stress that would have
Oh, absolutely.
that would have damaged his life going forward.
Absolutely.
If he had survived, if he had come out with broken ribs, bruises, um, you know, been kind of limping for a while, crutches. I said every time a police officer passes him, good or
He would have
bad,
been, oh, yeah, he would have,
he would have been conflicted.
mhm,
He would have been flashback. Every time he
mhm,
heard a siren, every time
mhm.
he drove down that road, his mum lived 80 yards away from
Oh, I
where he
know.
was beat up. So every time he walked down his mum's road, well, we say road. Every time he walked down his mum's street, like,
I know what you mean, yeah.
yeah. So every time he did that, every time every time he's in the area, everything would have triggered him, and it would have caused
Mhm,
him such deep mental and emotional pain.
mhm.
And so I work with a lot of men through that with regards to violence and um, just very specific things that you're affected by through masculine culture.
Do you think a lot of that is because of the way that, we raise our young men? To not really express themselves. You got to be strong. You have to be tough. And as a child, I know with me, my son, I'm like, look, stop crying so much. You don't need to cry
Mm,
so much. You teach them to be tough because they're going to be the man of their house one day. So they learn you teaching them how to suppress things as opposed to kind of letting it all out. And it's okay, to show your emotions and put your emotions on your sleeve. Do you think some of that may come from that?
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think I think what a lot of parents try to do is protect their sons. They want
Mhm.
but the in the conversations that I have with clients and and when I do talks and when I go and speak, um, in these conversations, in that protection, we are actually doing our sons a big disservice because if you say, typically parents are stressed and they're not focusing on the
Right.
minutiae sometimes. You've got loads of things to worry about. You're an adult, so you've got to
Mhm.
support them and all these other things. So in order to kind of break down the nuances of what it means to kind of feel these emotions is a lot of work, but it has to be done.
Mhm.
And the and when you're trying to protect your sons from going to school and being and not being able to stand up for themselves or look or defend
Bullied either.
themselves or
Yeah.
but I think there's a balance to that. There's a balance to what that looks like because we can't say on the one hand, you know go to school and be tough and don't let people take advantage of you, but at the same
Right.
time, at home, where they're supposed to be safe, they still can't do that at home. They
Right.
can't. They can't cry. They can't feel low confidence. They can't do those things. They're told to. Well, boys specifically are told to man up,
Mhm.
or
Right.
you know, build yourself up, or pull yourself up by the bootstraps. And
Mhm.
a lot of those things, these kind of negative influences, or the negative sides of these things, they lead to boys growing up and becoming bullies and
Mhm.
becoming people who the
I see
police
that.
love to have as their officers,
Mhm.
and or growing into positions where they go into the workplace and they become leaders and they're managers, but they're just tyrants, or going into relationships with people who they feel that they can dominate, and use violence against those who they deem weaker than them. And over time, we need to get comfortable with
Mhm.
allowing boys to be able to access their emotions, understand what those emotions are, know how to process them, and give them a reason as to understand the language as to why they are doing, or why their emotions is doing that. If you say, "Oh, stop crying if I give you something to cry about," that's already like fear
Right.
instilled and attached to the notion of crying. So when you're sad, you cannot cry, because if you cry, you're fearing
A spanking?
retribution. Yeah, you're fearing
Yeah.
something. So when you're doing
Yeah.
that, but again, it's about having that conversation and being like, okay, so we're crying. Why are we crying? What is wrong? What's happening? And we need to
Mhm.
understand why we're crying, so that we can then process what is going through. Because it could just be frustration that's just manifested in tears. It could be anger
Right.
that's just manifested in tears. It literally can be sadness too. So
Mhm.
it's an indicator for a lot of different things, but we
Mhm.
just kill it so early in boys, and you raise men who then have no connection with their own emotions.
But don't you think, there is a difference in how we should raise our girls and boys? You can't really very much raise them the same, because the dynamics and the things that they do throughout life is different. So do you think there has to be some sort of distinction in the way that we raise? Because girls, if they cry, you just might say stop crying, but it's not like you're
Mm,
gonna get a spanking or you're crying too much. You know what I'm
yeah.
saying? So it's more allowed and accepted. One of my viewers made a statement. It's so important to break these barriers for our men and have dialogue with our
Mm,
children.
yeah, you have to have the dialogue, but I you know
Thank you, Sunshine, by the way. I'm sorry, giving you a shout out. Thank you, Sunshine.
um to answer your question, do you think there should be a difference in the way that you raise kids? I mean, in general, like, everybody requires different things.
Right.
in
Yes.
general in
Mhm.
general your
In
kids are like will
general.
have different things. They are different. If you've got three kids, they
Right.
are three totally different people.
True.
And some may need a sterner hand to be a bit
Right.
more, to help them with direction. Some may need a more nurturing hand
Mhm.
to help them build their confidence, and some may
Right.
need an active parent to just be there. So it's in whether they are boy, girl, or non-binary, whatever. They will require separate and different things.
Right.
When we start to buy into the idea that it's okay for a girl to cry, but it's not okay for a boy to cry, we
Mhm.
start to create binaries. When we start to create binaries, we
Mhm.
start to we are unwittingly sometimes, like, not giving or boys in this context, we're not giving boys a chance as they grow,
Mhm.
because they grow into men who become ashamed of crying in front of their partner or their spouse, or in front of their kids or whatever, because because in the family setting they have been shamed
Right.
for doing it. So
Right.
yes, raise them as according to what the child needs, but don't do it based on the fact of their you know explicit gender, or whatever gender they
Right.
believe them to be. So
Now, I'm just taking a little small adversarial type of position just so we can have a
absolutely,
conversation.
absolutely, go on.
Um, now my thing is, don't you think throughout life that those stipulations or boundaries are set? That's just
Mm,
kinda like how it is, because when we look at sports, like women men play football. It's football contact more. Girls may play flag football. You know what I mean? It's sometimes there are certain jobs that we just expect men to, like more construction, whereas some women are now making a little entry into it, but you kind of think it's more for men than for women. I mean, do you think that society as a whole kind of place children in these separate type boundaries um, based on gender?
Absolutely, they do.
And yeah.
When I literally just recorded a podcast episode for my podcast, which is going out on Friday today, and the idea is when we start thinking about what a real man is and what a real man does and the kind of sports that men do,
Mhm.
when we look at the full contact sports that men do,
Mhm.
it's really all about sacrificing your body in order for you to win something. Yeah.
Okay.
And a lot of men go into jobs where they have to sacrifice their bodies. So whether
Mhm.
that be firefighting, police, army, American football,
Right.
anything where they have to sacrifice their bodies. But there are long-term ramifications for a lot of these roles.
Right.
And we push boys into that area because we condition them to 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 kind of get rid of their emotions, so we quell those emotions, and then
Mhm.
we condition them to only focus on their outward. So look at your bodies, look at the material things that you're providing,
Right.
look at the house that you have bought but are not maintaining, but look at the
Mhm.
family that you've created but are not supporting emotionally. Look at this, but the stuff that you're avoiding. So it's all of this
Right.
flashy stuff that we can show. And when we start to do that, we raise men who are disconnected, and by the time they come round to understanding who
Mhm.
they are, A, it could be too late. They could have taken their lives. B, they could have, walked out on their families because they don't know how to communicate what's going on with them. So the easiest thing to do is
Yeah.
to leave. Or
Mhm.
B, or C, like they get to their mid to late 50s and 60s, and they realize that they've got so much that they need to speak about, and they haven't been able to do it because they are recognizing that their life is no longer as long as it was
Right.
when they were
Because
30
of the
or when they were
undo. Yeah.
20.
Yeah. Right. Right.
So,
Because of.
and then now when they're 50 or 60, and then they've got all of these kind of emotional issues, which are causing a lot of
Mhm.
physical issues, which is causing a lot of disconnection from the kids and from families, and all these different stuff. By the time you get to that point, they've already
Mhm.
bought into all of the stuff that has been conditioned for them going
Throughout.
forward.
Right.
So
Right.
yes, so there are things that we need to start really um just looking at and just thinking about when we have boys, like when you say, and we ask them what they want to do with their life or what they want to do when they grow older. We need to
Mhm.
start understanding. So you mentioned, construction. You said there are some women that are going into construction now, and we've got this thing. I don't know what it's like in the States, but the whole we've got STEM. So science, technology,
They
economics, and
have stems
mathematics.
here.
STEM,
Yeah.
yeah, STEM, yeah.
Mhm.
So we're pushing women a lot into those areas. So we're seeing them like take up space, as they rightly should be taking up space in those areas, because you need two minds and you need different perspectives and you need difference
Right.
in these
I
areas.
agree.
But what we are also not doing, though, is on the other side is what I don't think he's a psychologist, but I think he's an academic called Richard Reeves. He said that the opposite to STEM are the heal professions, so that's health, education, administration, and literacy. And when you've got those professions are predominantly um, populated by women,
Mhm.
and they are not, and so that's psychologists, that's teachers, that's therapists, that's nurses, that's mental health nurses, that's physiotherapists, that's all those kinds of roles. Those are the numbers of men in those positions are dwindling and are going right down
Mhm.
because men are still staying in the STEM professions because
Mhm.
that's where they are being pushed, whether that means they're being
Because
pushed because of them
yeah.
being men. Women are breaking through in those professions because
Mhm.
we have a culture of, you know, we need women in these areas. We need women to be able to kind of provide perspectives and change and empowerment and whatnot. But men are not being empowered to work and encouraged to work as teachers or as healthcare assistants and all of these different areas. And we need to start giving kids a chance to be able to do things that they are passionate about, that they want
Mhm.
to do. If they're a boy and they actually are very nurturing as a boy, and they may want to be a nurse, they might not want to be a doctor, but they might want to
Right.
be a nurse. They might want to
Right.
work. They might want
Mhm.
to work.
And they need
Before,
male nurses.
and we need no nurses. What if they
Right.
want to work in? I know you've got the K through 6. Like, if they want to work with kids.
Mhm.
What is the? And this is why I Bet Elementary is a very good show, because it actually speaks to that. Actually speaks to that kind of understanding with Gregory, Gregory's character as a black male teacher who
Mhm.
comes from a family whose dad looks down on the profession, but
Mhm.
he wants to be a head teacher, but he also is beginning to understand what is required of these kids when as a black male teacher in that space too.
Mhm.
So it's a very we're starting to kind of shift and have these conversations, but we need to start pushing that and
It
allowing.
it's so funny you speak about a male teacher because just kind of ironic. My middle daughter, because I lost my older daughter, but
Sorry to
my
hear that.
thank you. But my middle daughter, she it's so funny. Her first teacher, we call it kindergarten here
Yep,
in the
yep.
States. I'm not sure what you all call it, but her first teacher was a male. And I was like, well, I'm not comfortable with that. And then my granddaughter, her daughter's first teacher was a male, and I was not comfortable with that, and I was just like, kindergarten male teacher, I just didn't like it. But they turned out to be some of the best teachers.
Yeah. And
But I
yeah,
just couldn't grip it. I'm
yeah,
gonna
but
be
yeah,
honest.
but
It
did you
was
did you understand, but do you understand why you're uncomfortable with it? Why
I
were you
do.
uncomfortable with it?
I was uncomfortable with it because for one, it was my granddaughter
Hmm.
and my daughter.
Hmm.
So that's one thing. And
Yeah.
he was a male. That's the
Hmm.
other. And I felt like at that age, he may not have been as nurturing and understanding. And it's just, I didn't feel comfortable with him launching her into her academics, not because he wasn't qualified necessarily. It was the gender thing. I
Hmm.
just didn't feel comfortable with a male teacher
But
for
so
kindergarten.
my question is, why though?
Why?
Why did you not feel comfortable with a
I
male teacher?
because he was a male. Because that is the reason why.
Because
That is the do you want a deeper answer?
yeah,
Like,
no,
I
no,
thought maybe, I didn't know if I was afraid something inappropriate may happen. I
right.
thought, if you want that deep,
No, no, no,
response,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I thought she would not be able to handle it, and it could leave a lasting impression if, I mean, those kind of things. I didn't give them a fair chance,
Yeah.
either one of them, but they ended up being some of the best teachers, I must say.
Exactly. And
I was
this is what,
afraid.
yeah, and you're well within your rights to be concerned about your daughter and
Yeah,
your granddaughter, so I
yeah,
completely understand that. We
yeah.
also have to look at what is taught to us as a society when we start to think that men can't be
Mm,
nurturing, when we start to think about that, because
just
the
like I
first
don't
thing,
like
because
male doctor I don't like male doctors for, like,
trust trust reasons
gynecologists.
trust reasons.
Yeah, for
So
gynecologists.
exactly, and exactly, and I understand that, because you know what, and I'm going to be honest, because when my friend, his dad is a gynecologist,
Uh-huh.
and I was like, why is a gynecologist? What's he doing? What's a
Yeah,
gynecologist doing there? Like, you should be dealing with men's business,
yeah,
But
exactly.
this is when I was in my early 20s. I
Right.
wasn't even thinking in the same ways, but I started to think about it, and I'm like, people, if people can administer care,
Mhm.
everybody has the capacity to do it. And if they can administer care, and they can administer care ethically and safely,
Mhm.
and especially in care professions, with their patients coming first, and their
Mhm.
students coming first, and their pupils coming first,
Mhm.
then what is the problem? And the minority of men who abuse their power, who are destructive and really want to just not be and not held responsible or accountable for anything that
Mhm.
they do. They just kind of blitz on through. If we go
Right.
back, I'm not saying to, I'm not saying that, every, my whole thing is everybody has a story, but it doesn't like take away the fact that they have done atrocious things. But if we start looking at the story and what the narrative has
Right.
been told to them, we're talking about this wider culture like that we were just talking about, as I was told at home, what was told in the community, what happened to them growing up, in order for them to want to do that to little kids, you know what I mean, or to do that to women, or to do all these other things. So
Right.
and then what that does is that builds up a distrust in society when we saw, the news and what is shown to us and all these different things. That builds
Mhm.
up a distrust in society. So then when you are having your daughter and you're taking your daughter to kindergarten for the first time, and you're seeing a male teacher, all of the programming, you're just like, he's a
No,
male
it's
teacher.
actually the orientation when you go and you're like,
Right. Okay. Yeah.
"Ah,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. The orientation, and
I'm
you're just,
gonna sit in class the first day."
and
Uh-huh.
you're like, oh my god, I saw on the news that
Yeah,
this happened, and
yeah,
somebody told me from that this happened to
yeah.
them, and and when I
Uh-huh.
was young, all of your
Yeah,
own stuff is happening. You're just like, I just
yeah,
don't
and
like
you're
that.
looking up there, you say, "Oh, look, my teacher have," and you look my daughter have, and you look at there and it's the Mr.
Mister.
Blah, and you're like, "Really? Is how we gonna do it?" You
Yeah,
know?
and you know what, it is well. Like I've had women teachers who have been awful
Mhm.
for me, and I've had
I
male
yeah.
teachers who have been awful for me.
Mhm.
Equally, I've had male teachers who have been amazing for me, and I've
Right,
had female teachers who have been amazing for me.
right.
And I think it's important, especially as kids, to see teachers who look like us, to know that it's a possibility, to know that you're safe, to know that you are able. Because as a kid, you don't know any different anyway. You're
Mhm,
going into school at
mhm.
4 years old, and you just want to learn. You're just keen. You're just like, oh, I just want to just
Right.
learn things. I want to just meet new people. I want to do whatever.
Just like
And you've
children
got
don't know race.
right, yeah,
They're
right,
taught.
and that they're taught things,
Right,
and then obviously, and then judgments are formed by the age of like what 6, 7, and then you
right.
start to run through that. But you need that kind of
Like, but like you said, you need that, and like one of my viewers is stating, we usually see women in those professions
mm,
teaching our children, but I'm glad that we have male teachers too,
yep.
and I am too. But
Yeah,
when you're talking
but you have,
kindergarten,
but you have to reprogram yourself. But you know
right?
what? On the flip side, people will be like, "Oh, a woman's come in and she's the one negotiating this business deal for
Hmm.
Facebook." And they're like, "Oh, I
Right,
kind of would prefer if she was a man, because I feel like men get things done in a different way." Or if they're a lawyer, if they walk in and it's a woman sometimes, or if it's a non-binary person, or
right,
if it's a
right,
queer man or whatever,
right,
a lot of
right.
people be like, "Oh, I don't know if they're
Uh-huh.
going to be able to do the job that I want," but because these are prejudices that we are all filled with.
Yeah. Hmm.
The same things
Right.
happen when black people walked in as in law professions, and people be like, are they going to be able to
Yeah.
get
Are
me
they
off?
gonna?
Are they going to be
Yeah.
able to
Oh,
get
I
me
need a.
off? Are they going to be able to get
You're
me my
right.
deal?
Right.
So you
Or
have to
I
like,
need a white. I need that white attorney because
right, because
they
they're
might
going to get
know
the
the
money.
right people and I'm black,
So
he's black, we gonna lose.
right, so it's one of those things that we actually have in our mind, and some of these are, and these things, a lot of these things, we have them
Right.
because they are founded in a reality, and
Uh-huh.
feelings and reality, they're both correct, you
Mhm.
know, but they
Mhm.
do not necessarily inform one another. Does that make any
Right.
sense? So you
It
can have your
does.
feeling,
It does.
you can have your feelings about something, but the
Mhm.
reality of the situation is very separate to
Right.
it.
To
So
it.
it's
I
about
agree.
understanding, what that looks like as well. So yeah.
Now let me ask you this. When
Mm,
we talk about the impact on relationships,
yes.
um, and men, you're in a relationship and you just feel like, I just can't get him to understand where I'm coming from, and
Mhm.
he feels like he does understand where you're coming from, but you're like, it's just not happening. Do you think a lot of that is because of the us kind of restricting or kind of conditioning men to like not be emotional, not so it kind of presents a disconnect in
Mm,
relationships with their significant others and children?
yeah. A lot of a lot of it is about how things are communicated, how we communicate to one another.
Mhm. Mhm.
Men don't understand women, women don't understand men, men speak in a particular way, women
Right.
speak in a particular way, blah blah blah, all those different things. I think the issue is the listening, and really really having genuine empathy for one another and really trying to understand that.
Mhm.
Um, but a lot of men that I speak to, they do just share the fact that, they're like, the straight men anyway.
Mhm.
They're the ones that are like, oh, they say they want an emotional man until he's emotional, and
That's true.
then they don't accept his emotions
I
in
think
that sense.
balance, balance. Now, I don't
Balance.
want nobody crying more than me now, Alex. You can't be around here crying all the time. Now we gonna have a problem.
Now the thing is,
Now
okay,
you gonna have
but
yeah.
okay, so now we have a
You know
thing, right?
yeah,
Now we
no,
have a
we could
thing, right? So
we have a
because
thing.
now, Carolyn, because now if you're crying all the time, what am
Well,
I supposed to do with that
yeah.
information? Okay, like what am I supposed to do with the information? Go in a corner and sort yourself out and come back to the
I
conversation.
I
Why
know,
are you crying?
right? I
you
know,
know
right?
what?
Get it together, right? Get it
Exactly.
together.
The same way, and the same energy needs to be applied. If you're going to be like,
Right.
okay, well, these are your principles and these are your values, then whatever,
Right.
you know. And it can be said, sometimes
Right.
people use tears to manipulate another person because they know that because you can get triggered. A lot of people get triggered by tears. Like people, you
Is
don't
that
know. So
true?
for
Is
example,
that really true?
for example, there are cases. These are people's
Oh.
experiences, right? They may have been growing up with their mum, for example,
Mhm.
and their mum, in order to get their children to do what they had to do or to feel sorry for them, they cried.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
now their sons or daughters feel guilty, and they do whatever they have to do. So now when this son or daughter goes into the relationship,
Mhm.
one learns that if you cry, you can get a man to do what you want, and one
Mhm.
learns that if a woman's crying, you have to do what she wants. And this is a very, very specific context,
Right, I
like, you know what I mean?
understand.
So I'm just to try and highlight the example. It doesn't happen
Mhm.
all the time. um and so therefore it becomes manipulative, and it becomes quite toxic, and it becomes quite dangerous, because
Mhm.
now there's the emotional imbalance, and there's the emotional power that is being had. um
Okay.
but my whole thing is about communication. And if a man is able to be emotionally free
Mhm.
with his spouse or partner, then that and a woman or a non-binary person is able to be emotionally strong for their partner or spouse, for example, I feel that that builds a very, very good foundation for a healthy relationship. You're allowing one another to be fully human, fully present. If a man is sitting there with you and he's watching something, and and emotion strikes him,
Mhm.
he should be able to feel safe with his spouse or partner in order to kind of share that emotion of what's going on,
Mhm.
rather than having to,
Yeah.
yeah, because a lot of men will just play it off. They will either find a joke to kind of like
Mhm.
misdirect the conversation, or they
Huh.
will kind of put on a masculine bravado and be like, oh, why is he doing that? Da, 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 da. They use all these things to kind of distract themselves from the actual feelings that are going on internally, because they don't feel safe in that
I was gonna say so it
environment.
should be a safe place.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I know you're probably joking when you said, I don't want you crying more than me now. But at the same
Mhm.
time,
Mhm.
it's a question of like, nobody wants somebody who's not in control of their emotions. But when we say control, we don't mean restricting your emotions.
Mhm.
You should be able to healthily express what that is. But that all feeds back to how boys are socialized to not embrace their emotions or understand the language that comes with their emotions. It's very difficult. So yeah, I think that in relationships, and whenever I use relationships, I always say that relationships aren't just romantic relationships. They are platonic, they are familial, mothers and sons, fathers, daughters, siblings, cousins, colleagues, mentors, mentees, all of that stuff. I think it's important to acknowledge how we can actually grow deeper connections with one another on
Mhm.
multiple levels, and learn to try and get the best out of one another. Because if you have an emotionally aware child, an emotionally intelligent child, they are going to have deeper connections and truer relationships that are going to see them through life in a way that is good, that is going to be very different to somebody who is very like emotionally unintelligent or unaware of themselves.
Let me ask you this, digressing just a little bit.
Mhm.
For instance, as a family or a family, like a sister, brother, mother, that type of family, or
Mhm.
a spouse or someone who's in a relationship with someone just dating, what type of keys do you look for when you want to talk about, okay, this person may need professional help, or to notice someone may be in a crisis type situation? Are there any type of key elements or things that someone should look for to be like, hey, this is deeper than I thought it was. This is just
Mhm.
not he's crying just because he saw something on TV, or he's crying because he's not happy with something. We notice this is a serious pattern. When should family step in, and when what type of indicators should they look for to determine
Okay.
this is bigger than I think it is?
Okay. I think without going to therapy talk, so it's very
Mhm,
like alienating for the audience, I would just
mhm,
say one thing that you need to look out for is behavior change,
mhm,
as behavior difference. So if you have, I don't know, if you know, Carolyn, choose a random family, a random family role. So whether that be son or whatever, if you choose a random family member, like a son or something, or a daughter or whatever, and
uh-huh,
you see that they've, you know, the general, you may, as a mother, I'm imagining you notice your
mhm,
children's personalities as they
right.
grow, so you know what, you know
What's
how they are.
normal,
Yeah,
right,
you know what's normal for that child. You just,
right,
they come. When we start seeing behavior patterns shift, you know,
mm,
they're not eating,
mhm,
they're not doing that, you know, then they're not saying what, you know, they're not acting in the same way, they're not doing that. When you start seeing behaviors change and behaviors shift, then you have to start thinking, what could be, what could be up here? There might be something going on here. It might not be
mhm,
anything cause of concern. It might actually just be they just, you know, they just might have been at school and they might have, you know, a kid might have said something to them and it's just kind of been on their mind a little bit
like
because, you know, a
situational kind of thing.
situational kind of thing.
Right,
So it'd be
okay.
good to, so again, it'd be good to talk to them. If we're talking about older people,
Mhm,
like, you know, adults, um, we have to look at behaviors. Are they eating more? Are they eating less?
mhm,
Are they doing more of what they love, or are they doing less of what they love?
m'kay,
One of the key signs of depression is when people stop doing the things that they love doing. If you know that you've got a cousin or a partner who um, loves playing music and loves, you know, kind of comes in on Saturday afternoon, wakes up, plays R&B, plays hip hop, does that, you know, he's creating an environment in the house, and then you notice that that kind of stops, or
mhm,
you notice that they like going out on bike rides and they kind of stop doing that and they
mhm,
become a bit more withdrawn. You start seeing things a bit differently. You're like,
mhm,
what's going on? I think it's time to start a conversation. Um, when people start to change the way they speak about
mhm,
certain stuff, because they could just be having a character change, but they
mhm.
also could be, you know, going through going through stuff. The words they use to describe themselves or a situation,
Can
you know.
things become exasperated as well, or is it always, doing like, slowing down and not doing? Can things become exasperated where they did
As
this
in
and now they're
fast,
doing more of?
that they're doing more. Yeah, they're doing more
Yeah.
to
Can
basically.
that be still or normally
Yeah,
not?
so it can be doing that. So what in the particular therapy that I kind of work with is
Mhm,
acceptance and commitment therapy.
mhm,
And in that there's an understanding that it starts with your thoughts, behaviors, and feelings, right? So
okay.
you may you may be okay with your body until somebody comes up to you and says you're looking kind of fat, you're looking kind of thin,
Mhm,
and they continually do that. Your behaviors start to then change because you either have a choice to kind of go down a route where you're like, well, I accept myself, because the point of the acceptance and commitment therapy is
mhm,
to get you to accept yourself, find that belonging with yourself, and then commit to meaningful action in order for you to do better for yourself, to live the
mhm,
life in your values in your own way. So there's two paths. There's one path which goes on the path of distraction, goes on
mhm,
the path of distraction, which then looks at saying, you know, you're doing more of X, Y, and Z. So you're doing more of the running, you're doing
right.
more of the drinking, you're doing more of the this, you're doing more of the that, because you're avoiding the feeling of of actually kind of accepting who you are and taking things at your own pace. The more you do, for example, if we're talking about the body image situation, the more you do, you can actually lead yourself into more injury. You
Mhm,
can lead yourself into forgetting who you are. you've seen people who have
Like
who have
bulimia,
yeah, bulimia, anorexia,
stuff like
you
that.
know.
Yeah.
If we're talking about boys have this thing. I don't know if it's a specific scientific term, but I know people have used it. I've said big orexia, where boys will either put on loads of weight because
Mm-hmm.
they become very stressed internally and they become very demotivated. So so they're sitting down often, they're playing games, they're not leaving the house, they're not going out for walks, they're not being active,
Mm-hmm.
or
Mm-hmm.
they'll be obsessed with getting bigger.
Okay.
Getting
Mm-hmm.
bigger. So there's that. So you got to look at so it all starts with the thoughts, behaviors, and the feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And when you start seeing the action starting to change, you have to start thinking to yourself, okay, what is because there's a difference between someone saying, oh, I'm kind of putting on a bit of weight. I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to put myself on a regime, and I'm going to say, okay, cool. I'm going to plan my meals now. Mom. I'm going to just be like, okay, I'm going to go for walks each day, and I'm going to just go right. There's a difference between that and saying, I'm not eating that. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
eating that because it's bad for you. It's bad food. I shouldn't be eating
Mm-hmm.
that. I'm fat.
Mm-hmm.
I'm this and the other.
Right.
And I'm or I can't do any of this. I'm going to the gym. I'm going for a run. I'm going for what I mean. So they are the same route, but they're very, very two different angles. So you get that in a lot
Okay.
of different areas. So that's just kind of one example that I would say. So yeah, check the behavior, check the words, and check the actions, and
Okay.
that's when these things start manifesting, and it stuff. You start having the conversation. The next step is the conversation, but that's all.
Okay. Is there a time, like, say for instance, if you see something, some of those different things are going on, and as a family member, you want to step in and they are pushing away? Is there a way or anything you could recommend if you really feel like this person needs help because they may hurt themselves or hurt someone, whatever the case may be? How do you know, okay, I'm at my point, there's nothing else I can really do? So that person could possibly self destruct or hurt someone
Mm,
else. Is there a limit if they're
yeah,
pushing away, or another route that you can take as a concerned family member to help them?
yeah. I I am of the personal opinion. It's never too early to seek professional help.
Okay.
So if you need to find a therapist, find one. If you need to find
Okay.
a mental health social worker, find one. If you need to find a mentor or a professional coach or something, find one. If you
Mhm.
have a trust, like I think the issue with family sometimes is that because unless they're trained in particular
Mhm.
areas, but the issue with family is that families care a lot about generally they care a lot about the well-being of their family
Person.
members,
Mhm.
but at the same time not every family member is positioned or well positioned to be able to help said person, especially if that family member is the cause or the trigger for that other family
Oh,
members
I
mental
see.
well-being.
Mhm.
So a lot of parents might not realize that what they've said indirectly
Mhm.
based on the tone of voice, their own behavior,
It's a
their own
trigger.
str their own stress could be a trigger for how their child
Yeah.
so they might not want to speak to you. They might not tell you the truth because them telling
Right.
you the truth doesn't make what for them won't make a difference. So they're just like, "Well, I'm not gonna tell her the truth. I'm just gonna be
Gotcha.
like, I'm fine, I'm okay." They will
Mhm.
kids are very kids, brothers, sisters, whatever, they're very good at, like, saying, "I'm
Yeah.
just gonna just act this way." And so when we start talking about DJ Twitch, which really affected me,
Mhm.
um, and I'm in the profession and I'm in the mental health space, and I saw that is because he put on a face, and because the day before he passed away, he was dancing on TikTok and he was doing all these things because
Right.
he put on a face because that's what he had to do. And this is what people had to see, and he's trying to bring joy to other people's lives, but
Mhm.
nobody could see the covert behaviors, and the covert behaviors are behaviors that are happening inside you. Covert thoughts
Right.
are things that people can't see. So
Mhm.
the things that change that people can't see. So
But
now he
even
could
the people that are not to cut you off, but even people that are like, do you think with these covert behaviors, because they're internal, if you have
mm,
a spouse or someone that's with you every day that they don't recognize that there's something going on, or do you think they just put blinders on? I mean, it seems to me that it
Mhm.
should be something pop out at some point, that something is going
And
on.
again, yeah, again, I don't know his life. I don't know his personal
Not
life.
him per se, just in
I know
general.
anybody. I don't know,
Yeah.
like, you know what I mean? Like, until they come to me with, "This is what's going on with me, and this is what's happening professionally anyway," you
Mhm.
don't know. You don't know. You can never really be 100% sure what is going on with a person, you
So
know?
someone could technically conceal it.
They can conceal what they need to conceal
Oh,
because,
okay.
you know, we have multiple levels to ourself, right?
Okay.
And, you know, we have what we wanna show people. We like,
Mhm.
publicly, we have people what we wanna show people that are close to us. We have things that
Mhm.
we keep for intimate things, and we have very, very private
Mhm.
spaces that we hold
Mhm.
for ourselves, right? And, so in a situation like DJ Twitches, for
Mhm.
example, it might be a thing where, you know, there might have been stuff that just went under the radar, that just went thing. He's a black man in America, who may or may not have been responsible for his family's income and his family's, you know, kind of
Mhm.
well-being and
Right.
financial well-being and support. And, you know, who knows what kind of conditioning or conversations were being had with him growing up, getting to that point. Who kno
Right.
who knows? Who knows what was
Right.
said to
Who
him?
knows?
So
Right.
we don't know. We don't know. But the point is, we never truly know what's going on with another person. We just have to
Right.
just try our best to communicate and listen to what is being
Mhm.
said and actually give people space. With regards to men, if we could bring it back around to men and men's mental health, a lot of men are so used to not being listened to. They're okay
Right.
being heard. Like, they will shout, they will raise their voice, they will do whatever, like, but they're so used to not being listened to
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
actually care and have meaningful care taken for their what's going on with them, that they are just so used to just kind of shutting off. So, you know, you be asked, "Oh, how was your day?" And then, you know, typically a man will be like, "Oh, I was okay.
Mhm.
Nothing much,
And
nothing
yeah.
much happened. It was all right." Like, they're just not gonna bring bring all of the stresses about how the manager spoke to him that
Mhm.
morning, how you know, the interaction he had on the train, the you know, before he even got to the workplace, what happened there, you know,
Right.
all these things. He's not gonna do that. Whereas a lot of girls growing up are allowed to, you know, they always say girls are chatty, girls are this, girls are
Right.
that, because they've allowed them to communicate. They
Right.
really train girls how to communicate and communicate with one another. So they will talk
Mhm.
when things
Right.
are going. They'll talk through what's
Right.
happening. So
Right.
yeah,
And so they learn that that becomes second nature to them, whereas men, a
right.
lot of times, they
And
have to work at it a little harder
yeah, and a lot of
because
men and a lot of men are conditioned not to trust one another.
Mhm. Mhm.
So you're a chat if you're a man who chats a lot, who talks
Mhm.
a lot about himself, that's information that could be used against you. I mean,
Right.
we're kind of taught that in a sense.
Right.
You know, there are
Right.
men that are just like, yeah, so he's gonna say then, you know, and a man will probably spread that or use that against him. And then now he's at a disadvantage and all this different stuff because we're just conditioned not to trust one another, because we are conditioned not to speak to one another, and we are conditioned not to have those feelings. And it just goes all the way back to just
Right. I get
experience
that.
and feelings that we just, yeah.
I get that. It kind of makes us who we are based
Mhm.
on all the things and experiences and all the things that are poured into us, not just in the household and life in general. So
Yeah.
tell me, let's move forward and tell me a little bit about your book and
Okay.
where people can get your book if they're interested.
Yeah. So my book it might be blurry on here, but it's called Time to Talk: How Men
Yes.
Think About Love, Belonging, and Connection. You can buy it anywhere. It's on. I know in America it's on the Barnes and Noble website. It's on the Target website.
Amazon.
On
I think
Amazon.
Amazon.
On
Yep.
Amazon. It's on bookshop.org.
Mhm.
Um, the book
Eh,
I wrote the book in during the pandemic, and it
uh-huh.
came out in 2021. And
Mhm.
I spent a lot of time. It's before I trained as a health coach. It's before I trained as a therapist. It's before I did any
Mhm.
of this understanding. I was really just speaking from my heart,
Mhm.
genuinely. I was speaking about from my experiences, of not knowing or feeling loved, not feeling a sense of belonging, and feeling very disconnected from myself. So I was kind of really writing from a past self as I was writing the book in the present day.
Okay.
Um, because I was writing about experiences as a journalist. I was writing about experiences in the early days of university, and I spoke to a lot of men for the book. I did a lot of interviews with men about
Okay.
their emotional health and emotional well-being. We have men who have been emotionally manipulated. We have men who have really had deep senses of shame about their identity and themselves. We've had men who've not been able to cry or grieve the deaths of their friends due to kind of like in the UK, stabbings are a big issue,
Mhm.
kind of akin to gun violence in the
In the
US.
US. Mhm.
Um, so gang violence was a lot of was a big thing. Fathers, who are trying their best with their kids, but also on the other side we have amazing love stories of men who found their forever person, like in the early stages of their lives, but also in the later years. We've got
Mhm.
we've got a multitude of men, and I wanted to speak to men from all backgrounds and all experiences so that we could actually create a dialogue um, around our own well-being going forward.
So is your book more of a compilation of different interviews? And
So
and
it's a
then you kind of
So it's a mix of anecdotes and personal stories,
okay,
and then the personal stories of other people, kind of
okay,
weaved into a singular message. So it's
okay,
structured around 6 myths of masculinity.
okay,
Um, so things like real men don't doubt themselves, real men don't fail, real men
right.
don't cry, real men have no fears about their bodies, or real men, all of those kinds of experiences, like real men are fearless and have to be on the go all the time, sort of stuff.
Right.
So yeah, it's a conversation. It's a
Okay.
conversation starter.
Okay, so you kind of talk to you put everything together, put all of that in there, and then at the end or somewhere in there, do you kind of give your opinion about
Yeah, I mean, at the end of
everything?
there are several sections in each chapter where I kind of I round up an
Okay.
idea and a topic, so it's easy to follow.
Okay.
It's not just like this big long conversation, and then at the end it's like this thing. It's
Okay.
several rounding up, so you kind of, and there's
Got you.
places to start, there's places to think and reflect and think, oh,
Okay.
actually, did I speak to this person in that way, or what kind of things going on? Because my whole mission, especially, and I will kind of speak a bit about the hypnotherapy side of stuff, because I know you said you were brought on a stage,
Yeah, it was.
and that is
When I was
stage
in
that is
college.
I know. I actually saw one of those when I was in university, right?
Yeah.
I saw a hypnotist. I
Uh-huh.
never went up, obviously, because I was just like, this just looks so gimmicky. However,
Yeah.
however, when I had the same reservations when I went to study this,
Mhm.
because I was like, is it going to tell me, like, how to do all these things, like clap 3 times and you're a duck and all this stuff? And I was like,
Right.
I just don't really want to do
Yeah, that's what I thought. I'm like,
that.
I'm still not
But
asleep, but
yeah,
go ahead.
but at the same time, but we're taught very early in the training that that is
Uh-huh.
that is stage hypnosis and stage hypnotherapy, and is used for a very particular experience or whatever. And that's not what most hypnotherapists know or use, and it's kind of unethical in a way, and all these different things. So hypnotherapy is basically getting clients into a heightened state of focus, and we go into hypnosis often in in our day-to-day lives. Have you ever daydreamed?
I
Have
can
you
see
ever
that.
Yeah, have you ever daydreamed? Or when you're driving
Mhm.
and you know where you're going, and you know the route, you know your car. I'm not necessarily
Mhm.
know where you're going, but when you're driving and you're kind of in that focus mode, and you're just kind of like, I'm driving. Like, so you're
Mhm.
not thinking about it in
You call
like,
it a fog. Is it like
yeah,
the
yeah,
fog kinda
yeah,
thing?
but it's kind of like you're just driving, right?
Yeah, you
So,
just kinda
so
dazed.
yeah, so you're
Yeah,
just there. You know what lane you're
yeah.
in. You're kind of aware of the people around you. You know that you're
Mhm.
kind of aware of the
I've
size of
been
your
there
car,
before.
all of that stuff. So there's that, or when you're daydreaming, or when you're listening to an
Mhm.
amazing song, and you're just like, because with songs that you hear it, and then you're just listening to it, and you could just be staring into this direction just for ages because you're listening to the music.
Mhm.
That's Those are hypnotic states. So, which is why
Mm.
music and meditation is actually really effective, because You go into the hypnotic states, and it alters your neuro pathways. So
Oh, okay.
hypnosis helps you get into a deeper sense of connection with yourself. I find it helps you. It helps with many things like anxiety, phobias, sleep, depression, and anxiety. And the way that I work with it is when is trying to understand our inner worlds, trying to really reconnect with who we are internally, and understanding those areas. So you can end up thinking back on an experience that you might not be too clear on. So let's use hypnosis and hypnotherapy to get you into that deep sense of relaxation, so that your body is open to learning and figuring out what is going on. And we can then move through that in your memories and in your subconscious, to try and get to those areas, to try and get clarity. It's also really good for pain as well, pain management too.
Mhm.
So a lot
Do
of
people
dentists use it a lot of the time.
people actually go to sleep? I mean, do you actually, like,
But you're not
put
asleep.
people to sleep? You're not really
Because
asleep, right?
asleep,
They say
asleep,
go
falling asleep is what we call, and it's not negative, but it's a negative reaction to the hypnotherapy. So most people,
okay.
so you can fall asleep. That's not a problem. No one's going to be like, "Oh, you shouldn't have done that. Everything's wrong."
Right.
You are likely to do that because you are in a deep in sense of relaxation, and you're what I mean, and you're there. But
Okay. Okay.
it's about but the hypnotherapist, their responsibility is to get you into that, what we call trance, or into that space
Mhm.
safely, and get you
Mhm.
out of that space safely. If you think of a hypnotherapist as a guide, so you're leading everything, you're in control of everything, you're leading,
Mhm.
you're taking them down the path of, this is the root of my anxiety. I want to really learn to do this. This is the root of my phobia. This is the root of
Mhm.
my sleeplessness and my sleepless nights.
Mhm.
And you're then working with them to get
Mhm.
them into a space where they can actually become aware of what is causing this stuff. And then we can start doing some meaningful action and some meaningful work to get you from one place to the next.
So that is something you are going to use when you start. Are you practicing now? Or are you
Yeah.
still going? I know you said you're still in training,
Yeah, yeah, no. So I
so I
mean,
didn't.
so I've qualified as a hypnotherapist, and
Okay.
I operate as a therapeutic coach,
Okay.
the full psychotherapy. So I mean, I've been trained fully, but there's certain barriers I need to get through in order for me to get the full
Okay.
psychotherapy thing. But in the
Okay.
main, I'm fully trained. So it's just
Okay.
about working with as many people as I can,
Okay. So you'll be kinda using that, utilizing that in your
if needed. If needed,
needs. So it's not a normal thing.
it's not something that I use all the time, but it's
Gotcha.
something. It all depends on what the client needs. If a client comes
Okay.
in, if the client comes in and they are really struggling to relax,
Mhm.
and this is very specific in the black community as well, because the legacy of the slave trade and the legacy of being enslaved peoples for how many generations and years,
Mhm.
has kind of affected our genetic makeup, in that we have this innate guilt of resting, and the body doesn't recuperate in the same way that, say, you know um, other ethnicities do.
Mhm.
So a lot of black people feel that they can't rest. What is rest? So when they all of a sudden fall sick,
Mhm.
they try to get out of that sickness quick, because ingrained in us, that's like when an enslaved person would fall sick, in order for them to not, be rendered useless or whatnot, they would try and get back to work as quickly as possible to be able to do what they have to do. And then
Mhm.
through that, after that, when you're a black person say in the South or in the Caribbean or wherever, or in South Africa, that we're called lazy, we're called all these things, we're called,
Mhm.
so the men, typically the women too, are just, and even the kids, everybody, they have to be working from an early age. So they choose work over school, they choose work over rest, they choose work over love, they choose work over
Right.
everything. And that's kind of ingrained in our bodies. And that's why we have these things like hypertension, heart failure, diabetes, arthritis, mental
Mhm.
health issues, all this stuff, because we just do
Right.
not know how to rest and recuperate and help our bodies do better. So
Well, I totally agree with you that rest and relaxation is key to just functioning and being able
it's
to be a productive person. I totally, totally agree with you. And I also, Alex, I think you gave us a whole lot of information today as well.
oh,
I know that I benefited from it, and I hope my audience benefited from it as well.
absolutely.
And you guys, if you want to buy his book, I know Amazon, but you said Barnes and Noble. Where else did you say? Give us
Target, Target,
Tar
have it.
Target. Okay.
Bookshop.org, have
Okay.
it.
Okay, and the name one more time.
It's called Time to Talk:
Time to Talk.
How Men Think About Love, Belonging, and Connection.
All
Um,
right. Wow. Well, thank you so much again for being on the show. We thoroughly
thank you.
appreciate it, and much
Thank you.
success to all you have, to look forward to in all your endeavors.
Yeah.
I know you're gonna do
If you
well.
wanna find out more about me, just head over to my website. If it's
Mhm.
easier, it's alexholmes.co. No,
Okay.
not .com, not .co.uk, alexholmes.co, and you'll find H
HOLMES?
yeah, ALEXHOLMES
MES.
.co, and you
Okay.
will find everything there.
There you go. He made it simple for you all.
Yep.
All right. Thank you so much, and I
Thank you.
appreciate you, and I enjoyed having you on
Thank
the
you so
show.
much. Thank
All
you.
right. All right.
Bye.